Here we are at the Gateway API meeting for January 19th, 2026. Um, Today is a holiday in the US of A, so we expect some lighter attendance. We have a pretty light agenda. So yeah, I guess it's only Ricardo, me, and David today. So at the moment, so feel free to add anything, folks. But for the recording, just wanted to remind everybody that the release board is here. Flynn is keeping this up to date. Um, the We've got things going to experimental that need sponsors, things going to experimental that need conformance, or things that are in. So yeah, uh, things that are going to standard that are still in progress need conformance and ready. So we have about 3 weeks until the RC. I think we may cut the branch a little earlier than that. We're still discussing exactly how we'll make that happen, but so we've got about 3 weeks to finish up all the stuff we got to do. So yeah, please, if you want things to be in, then we need to finish up the stuff that we need to do. Once we cut the release branch, the only stuff that will be the only stuff that will be in there, like that we're moving, is stuff that actively moves things forward. So yeah, please. Make sure you are reviewing the PRs that you're supposed to review and pushing your PRs forward. Speaking of reviewing PRs, I know I owe some reviews that I'm going to catch up on today. Um, Aside from that, does anyone have anything else they want to talk about? Ricardo, David?
Yeah, I mean, I have some things that I will keep bothering folks to review. We have the Gateway API security guidelines. It should be reviewed again and probably merged before listener set.
Okay.
David is working on the listener set, so an update on the release right now, at least on the other items. It's like we do have a bunch of TLS route conformance already ongoing, and some that are probably going to be merged between this and next week. I know that Frosty and Ali they are working on that, and David is going to be working on listener set conformance fixing some things. So hopefully we will get at least some those two features,
Yep.
merged. And I have cores on my list as well, but it's going to be hard to review all of them. So
Yeah, yeah.
any help
Trust
is
me, I know.
appreciated on the cores. Yeah.
Yeah. I have been avoiding cores a bit because I'm not super confident that I really understand exactly how cores works well enough. Like I haven't used it enough to really feel confident reviewing that the fields work exactly as they're supposed to. It's one of the reasons why I haven't helped push that forward. I think that we really need some domain experts who actually know better how cores works. I've seen a few issues opened about fields not being handled quite correctly, or they're slightly surprising and some things like that. That's one of the things I'm worried about with cores. Um, yeah, well, let me.
Yeah. I'm probably getting some security folks like Norwin, who is more security oriented,
Hmm.
actually to take a look into the course conformance
Yep,
as well. So yeah.
great, awesome. Yeah, I am intending to have a look at the. I know you all have been doing a great job getting the conformance tests for the listener set merged. I have had a bit of a look at them, but I haven't had time to sort of really sit down and think about them. I look, I'm late on implementing the Facilium, implementing listener set Facilium. I am hoping to start that in the next little while. So probably when I do, that will be when I'll actually have a chance to look really deeply at the conformance tests. I have found it's very difficult to review conformance tests like properly until you actually build an implementation and try and run the conformance tests against it. Um, yeah, until you're actually in the nitty-gritty of building an implementation, it can be very difficult to make sure that we're actually hitting everything in the conformance tests.
Yeah.
Um, that said, my PR for backend TLS policy for Cilium is mostly reviewed. I'm waiting on the last couple of reviews. And yeah, that one really highlighted for me how difficult a lot of the stuff we did in backend TLS policy is to implement. Um, I think we did it for good reasons, but it is really hard to implement. In particular, some of the stuff I know you've added the tests about config backup updates, and the conflict resolution for backend TLS policy is really not straightforward. Yeah, it took me. I was looking at the thing and just the commit to add the reconciliation, not actually translating the thing or to making it a real feature, just the commit to handle just the Kubernetes bits is like 6,500 lines of code in Cilium because I had to add
Nice.
a bunch of stuff to handle like pre-computing the conflict resolution, the conflicts for backend TLS policy.
As you are doing that, just for my own clarity, like as I told you, Rob and Flynn, I'm willing to propose extending backend TLS policy to any TLS termination and
Hmm.
any filter. So, do you think it's gonna be also that hard, or like the scaffolding for the
Yeah, so it'll make
implementation would just work, and later it would be
so
just
it'll
easier to
make
do that?
it so the conflict resolution behavior is still the same, right? Like so the and conflict resolution behavior is still the same in that uh so when I'm doing the conflict resolution for Cilium, for conflict resolution, the first phase I do is I just look at all of the backend TLS policies, figure out what services they point at, and make sure that we apply the rules about, only one service can point at only one backend TLS policy can point at any specific target, whether that be the service with no section name or a service with a specific section name. Um, so that part doesn't change, right? Like because if there's a backend TLS policy pointing at a service, then that part doesn't change. And then I take that, I build a data structure there, take that and send it off to the bit that actually writes the statuses, and that's the part that figures out if the backend if those services are relevant for Cilium. And so that's going to be the trickiest part is that figuring out which services are relevant, which so the trickiest part is that when you're writing a Kubernetes controller and you have to figure out you have to watch all events for something and then throw away the ones that are not relevant. So that will just make adding the thing for external auth, for example, will mean that you'll need to keep track of that service and you'll need to handle the case that uh you know the external auth service has a backend TLS policy. So um your config for the when you are checking the uh doing sort of the dependency chain backup, the HTTP route check will not only need to check all the backends, but it'll also need to check all of the HTTP route filter things and look
Mhm.
for backends in there. And if there are there, then it adds them to the list. Um, yeah, so it's not ridiculously hard, but it is just another thing that you'll need to think about. And I think for implementations that want to do TLS termination for services for something else, like it's really important that they handle the conflict resolution correctly. The conflict resolution calculation is the same, but yeah, it's really important that you make sure that that it works exactly the same because otherwise things are going to behave weird. Um, and it's already back TLS policy is already complicated enough.
Is it probably too much for this release? Like,
Um, no, I don't think so because back TLS policy is already standard. I think that so I think the big thing here is and so hang on, just let me make a couple of notes about what we uh I'm
and
only going to list terminated TLS out and gRPC route because we're specifically excluding terminated TCP route for now anyway in another thread. Um, yeah. Sorry, I lost track of the question you asked.
no worries. My question was like, if we feel that this would be part of 1.5, if we just
Yeah,
take
I
the
think.
idea gap, or
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I think if we're going to do it, we do need to add. So Ricardo and I have been talking sort of out of band about adding a concept that we don't really have. We effectively have at the moment. We never really talked about, which is currently if you have a feature and you have another feature, sometimes you end up with conformance tests that only run when both of those features are present. And so Ricardo, you want to say what the name you want to give it is? I think it's a good name.
Was a union feature or something like
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah. I
It's
think
like,
that's
yeah.
that's what you were going to call it, and I think that's a good name. So an example here that bit me is that today, if you support mesh, if you in the mesh profile, if you support mesh, if you want to do the mesh profile and you support gRPC route, there's no way to say I support I support gRPC route only for gateway, but not for mesh. So if you are doing the mesh tests and you support gRPC route for gateway, you also support gRPC route for mesh. So for me, that meant that when Cilium upgraded to 1.4, I think, I had to actually implement gRPC route for mesh as part of bumping the dependency to 1.4 for us to be able to pass conformance. Um, So yeah, and so another example of that is terminated TLS route. If you want to do re-encryption to your TLS backend, then you would use a backend TLS policy, and so that means that we would have two features: backend TLS policy and terminated TLS route. And if you support both of them, then it's expected that you will support the combination of both of them as well. And that's what the union feature idea is. So again, just to have this down on the recording here for anyone watching it afterwards. I'll make some notes in here about this. But yeah, I think it's a good idea, Ricardo, and I think that we may need to add something to some of the docs about features, about supported features, as well, just to sort of mention that this is a possibility, and that it is an expectation that if you support feature A and feature B, and feature AB has some specific behavior, then you must, if you support this and you support this, then it's core to support the interaction of them. You can't opt out of the interaction. Um, yeah, so and I think it's particularly fine for Terminator TLS route because that has its own feature. So, if you don't want to support, if you support backend TLS policy already, which is me, and you don't support back Terminator TLS route yet, then part of adding support for Terminator TLS route is you have to support the combination of backend TLS route and Terminator TLS. So yeah, um, yeah. So I think it's really important that we are very clear about that.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay, I'll make some more notes there in a minute. Um, okay, I'm going to open my can of worms for the week and say I'm going to open an issue but later that I would like us to write down our the project and I would like us to agree and write down on the project's policy about AI generated PRs and what degree of AI generation, specifically what degree of AI assistance, is okay. I think it's particularly important for us because we're mainly a specification and less code. Um, my experience so far has been that AI can generate like acceptable code PRs, but for detailed specification writing, a lot of the time it really struggles because specification writing is all about precision in language, and LLMs at their heart are a stochastic thing that randomly picks words that should go in the chain. Um, and so I think that they don't do well at being very precise about language. I think for GEPs in particular, I think that you I'm going to suggest that we have a very low ceiling for acceptable amounts of AI assistance, probably just grammar and spelling and styling, and that's it. Um, I prefer not to see GEPs being sort of mainly AI generated. If you want to use it to help you with structure, no problem, but I expect the words to be the person who's writing it as words mainly. So yeah, I'm going to make an issue about that and get started on, and we can discuss in the issue where we're at. I'm going to put my thoughts in there, and then we can argue there about it. I am aware that I am an outlier, but but I think that it is important for us to write something down because I know on Cilium, I have definitely started to see a big upswing in very high levels of AI assistance PRs that are not very useful and require a lot of reviewer bandwidth. And given that the Gateway API project is already massively struggling on reviewer bandwidth, I think we need to carefully husband that resource in the animal husbandry sense of the word. Um, yeah. So yeah, that was one of the few things I wanted to talk about. Um, Candace.
I would just say that I agree with AI generated PRs that they're really problem to review. Maybe if we could get someone to do AI generated review, or maybe if we could incorporate AI, AI assisted review before we do that. Make it contingent on us trying AI assisted review and evaluating whether it's worth incorporating. That we might consider AI generated PRs after that point, if they can pass the review. I don't know. But I agree with you. I think AI generated PRs are really a bunch of nothing sometimes. But I don't want to say to people that they can't use it for test generation or for enhancement proposals or blog writing even, because that kind of stuff there's a lot of boilerplate involved with it that we can train the AI tools to use. That kind of stuff it can, a lot of people like doing that. A lot of people like writing blogs and enhancement proposals, but it's very, very boilerplate in the first iteration. And that actually Ricardo wrote an enhancement proposal generator tool that runs in Cursor
Yes.
for our
For
team.
OpenShift, that's true.
Yeah. I don't know how many people have used it, but it did a decent job given the
Yeah.
right inputs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of my things there that I think it boils down to is like, I don't mind people using AI stuff, like AI for text generation, if and only if they are prepared to read what the AI generated and make sure it makes sense, right? Like, my biggest gripe about AI generation is when you are generating it and you don't even bother reading it, then I'm like, well, why would anyone else want to read it? You're putting your
Right.
name to this, right? Like, you should know what it says. You should be able to understand what it says, and you should agree with the way that the LLM has like structured its arguments and stuff. And so if I put a query in and say like, hey, why did you argue it like this? And you say, I don't know, the LLM did it, then I'm going to be like, well, you should go away and update and fix this, please. Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
like you need to be able to you need to be able to understand what the thing is saying, and you need to be able to you need to be able to defend any arguments that it's making, like, or else there's no point, right? Like, I don't want to be, if I wanted to use an LLM to generate a thing, I would go and do it. I don't want other people doing it for me to then say, can you please tell your LLM to make this update, right? Like, that's not the point of open source. The point of open source is to have people doing things together. I agree that there's absolutely a place for AI, particularly in stuff that's very boilerplatey, like test generation, great use case for it. I think I think we're doing like AI light already. That's what CI is really. Like CI is a repeatable set of tests that you run every time, right? Like, and so particularly with the linting stuff that we've recently added with Cube API linter, which lints the types for you. That is exactly the sort of thing that used to take Rob and I hours and hours in any API review, going through and checking all the fields, to make sure that the things that are optional are pointers and all of those sorts of things, right? And now we have a linter that just does that, right? So, and that's amazing. But equally, that's not really an LLM thing. That's just that is an automation thing. And so, yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not opposed to automation at all. What I'm opposed to is people is people using the LLM to not have to understand what they're doing, right? Like that's
Yeah.
I am fine with it for helping you. Particularly, I know for a lot of English is my native language, and I am avidly literate, so like I have no problem in writing large volumes of text. Ricardo has poked me a number of times that he suspects that I have a secret LLM on the side helping me write things. I'm like, no, I just like writing. But and I know for a lot of people, for folks, particularly if particularly folks who don't feel comfortable writing in specific types of English, having an LLM come along and be like, make this more businessy or make this more native speaker sounding is really, really handy and makes people feel much more comfortable. Like, I'm not opposed to that, but again, like the structure and all the arguments need to be generated by a person's brain, and then and then I'm fine with people using it to tidy things up and to help make it sound more natural. But I think that blindly firing off PRs that AI generated for you without checking them is the epitome of what we don't want. So yeah, that's what I am hoping to be able to write an AI assistance policy to do, is to say, hey, it's okay to use some, but the main author of everything in Gateway API should be attributable to a person, not to an LLM. And
Yeah.
that's my sort of thesis statement.
I kind of like that on the sense, like I was kind of say, like usually it's helpful for the I've been doing that with some gaps, at least on the when I just want to scaffold something with the what, why, and who, at least like
Yep.
writing user stories or the thing that can say on that we have on our enhancement proposal. It's like I kind of hate drawing mermaid diagrams, right?
Oh yeah,
It's
mermaid
kind of
diagrams is very difficult to
yeah.
hide. Yes,
So
it is very difficult.
it does a pretty decent job on that, but I fully agree. Like I mean, you need to know how to use the tool. I think that's the point, right? Like we want you actually to know what you are writing, or at least what you are asking
Mm.
for AI to generate, right? So that's yeah. But yeah, on my defense, Claude did a great job writing a proposal for banana route, like on Gateway API. I used that as a demo, and it was like I was almost convinced that we could support bananas as well. So,
Nice, very nice.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think I'd like to get that written down. Like I have noticed in just this year, like even just in this very very early weeks of the new year, a substantial uptick in like very AI generated PRs. One thing that I think I do want to be clear on though is I think that um in particular, if you are discussing something, having an AI write comments when you are responding to people like is like a big, to me, a huge no-no. Like if I don't want to feel like I'm talking to an LLM. I want to feel like I'm talking to a person. I would much rather read text that was generated by a person, even with errors or anything like that, and feel like I'm actually talking to a person, not feel like I'm someone is um someone is sort of mediating a conversation between me and an LLM. Like that one, like to be a bit crass, it pisses me off. Like I'm like, no, like I really want to talk to a person. If you're proposing something, you should be able to defend what you're, to explain what you're proposing, and you shouldn't need to. I know. I hope that I'm not that intimidating that people feel like they need to run what they say, respond to me with through an LLM to make sure that that I'm not going to shout at them or something. But like I promise, I am actually quite nice, and I won't shout at you, even if I disagree with what you're doing. Um, so yeah, Candace, do you want to just walk us through what you want, and I'll take some notes for you?
Just some. I had an item as well, but you can bring yours first because I forgot to add to the agenda. Okay, just don't want
Okay.
us to drop off yours. I added to the
Yep.
chat and forgot. Yeah.
Yeah, I just added mine to chat too, so you can go first. That's fine.
Okay, cool. So just an update on the dropping the listeners' requirements on Gateway, right? So we got that issue with folks with implementation studying what would be the impact on that. I think all of the feedback is really valuable on some things that we were forgetting, like the need. I mean, the majority of the implementations, they need to have a service created for a load balancer, and this may lead to some confusion with users as well. So I think that for now, we kind of agreed that we won't do that, but we need to think on a way to actually to let gateway admins know that they need to create at least one listener, even if that listener it's a dummy listener, or if that listener it's not accepted by it's not going to select any namespace or something like that. So and then we can rediscuss about that. Kubernetes doesn't support portless services. Like you cannot create a service without any port. So you cannot go up front and create like, hey, I'm going to create this service of type load balancer to pre-allocate my load balancer IP and not set any port. And the status will be kind of broken as well. So I think we could probably postpone that until we have a better solution, either on Kubernetes or gateway API. But I wanted to bring this here and see if we have anything else that we want to to consider on that.
Yep, no problems. Check the notes that I put there, Ricardo, and just make sure that that covers what you wanted to say. But yeah,
Wait,
Candace, to answer, do you want to say
sorry.
anything more, Ricardo? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I always was under the impression that if there were no listeners, it would act as like a default gateway. You're
So
saying if there's
right now,
no,
today, there needs to be minimum one listener for a gateway to be accepted.
really,
Yep. Yeah, you
what
can't
has it?
make a
Oh,
gateway. You can't make a gateway like it's not the API server won't let you make a gateway that doesn't have at least one listener set. That's not a listener set. That doesn't have the
wait,
settings for one listener.
listener or listener sets?
So yes. So you must have at least one listener in the listeners array in a gateway, regardless of whether or not you have a listener set. So
But you don't have to have at least one listener set
no,
in the spec, right? So
no,
do you have to always have at least one listener? Like, can't
yes.
there be no listeners?
No, that's what we're talking about. Is that currently listener is a required field, and there must be at least one listener. And so, if you want to create a gateway that doesn't have any listeners
Oh,
attached to it because you want to add all of them via listener set, today you actually have to add a dummy listener that
oh, yeah.
you, yeah,
Okay, I got it. With no host names in it,
yeah, with no
right?
host
So
names or
it's
like on a port that you don't want to actually use or something like that, right?
okay.
And
Yes.
S-
yeah,
All right.
Selecting no
Never mind.
namespaces. Like you
Yeah, I
use
was
allow from
thinking.
namespace and put some random label that it's never gonna work,
yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, so but I mean and it depends on exactly how implementations are handling that. It's not unreasonable that an implementation might look at just the gateway and be like, well, I've got listeners for these. Whether or not there's any config attached to them, I'm going to open ports for them by adding them to the service, right? Like it's but we haven't defined if that's the correct behavior or not. Like my gut feeling is it's not like that you shouldn't open a port unless there's config there to like serve. Like there's no point you shouldn't open ports unless there is something listening on that port. So if you open a port on a service, if you create a service with a port where there's no backends to that service, then it's not going to it's not going to go well because the port is going to be like half open. But again, we haven't specified that anywhere that you shouldn't, how you should handle that case because it never came up. And so part of what we need to do to make listeners optional to be able to have zero listeners is to say what happens if you have a gateway that has no listeners and no allowed routes. Well, like what happens? Like is that allowed? If it is allowed, what should implementations do? We don't have anything that we have to define that. And also Ricardo raised a good point that we might need to add some stuff to allow listeners to sort of say, hey, to like add some extra things around the shape of the listeners, like allow protocols or something like that. So yeah, so there's a couple of things that we need to do there to be able to make listeners optional correctly. And it's enough work that we probably won't be able to squeeze it in. We wouldn't be able to squeeze it in and have it be good, have it be correct before we're due to release version 1.5. So that means that for v1.5, we're going to have listener set be standard, which means like the object is standard, but there's going to be this funky interaction where we haven't fixed where gateways require a dummy listener, even if you're not planning on using.
I think that, and I spoke with this with Ricardo. I'm not too sure of the spec, but is it possible that we can have a gateway, but it won't have a corresponding service deployed if no listener specified? Because that might be a way we can get around it if we need to
So yeah,
remove the restrictions.
Absolutely. Like it's possible for us to specify that, but right now because it's unspecified, we need to make sure that we don't change it without including that in the spec, and we just need to make sure that when we do include it, we sort of lay out all of the use cases so you can write like if nothing else, so you can write conformance tests. But it's we want to be very clear with people like what happens in this case, what happens in this case. If you do have no listeners, what's the difference between a gateway with listeners that are invalid and a gateway that has no listeners, right? Like
Yeah.
today, right? Like you can have 4 listeners, and if all of them are invalid, that means a certain thing. Like that means that you need to reject the gateway. But so like,
Uh,
so and so that's what I mean. Like we've just got to write down like go through the rules carefully and make sure that we're not missing any cases or leaving holes that are unspecified.
okay, I
There
understand.
is
Thank you for clearing it up.
there is another problem on that, that is about cloud costs, right? Like if you allow a user to keep creating and deleting a listener set, and they are the only ones there, it
Mm,
may be the case where a service keeps being created and deleted, and you keep creating and deleting a load balancer,
mm.
which can be
Which is the
problematic as
exact
well.
point that people wanted to avoid by having listener set. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, so that again, that's one of the things I think. I suspect my gut feeling there is that it may be a thing that we need to leave up to implementations how they handle it. For Cilium, for example, like I've been pretty specific that for our implementation, we don't make anything unless there's config that makes sense, right? So unless there's accepted route, there's a gateway with at least one valid listener and one valid route that has a valid backend, then we don't create. If we don't see those things, then we don't create the service. Right. I mean, the reverse of that is that it is possible if you break something badly enough that the service that you had will get deleted, and then when you fix it, you'll get a new service which might have a different IP address. But like that's the price you pay for sort of erring towards correctness. So yeah, and I think it's okay for us to leave some space there for implementations to differentiate based on how they handle that specific case. Um, yeah. Okay. Thank you for good discussion on that one. Yeah, feel for David, if you want to add any notes into that section about some of the stuff you said, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they want to say the on the listeners on optional and gateway thing? Okay, Candace, over to you.
Yeah, so Ricardo brought it to my attention that it's possible for um, an HTTP route, for example, to have parent refs from 2 different implementations.
Mhm.
Like, so you could have
Yep.
a parent ref that was an Istio provider and a parent ref that was a Cilium provider.
Mhm.
And I mean, this would cause a lot of problems if you guys were running different CRD versions.
Yes, yes, it really would. That's why the CRD version management thing is one of the biggest problems we have. And so but to answer the specific question before we get into the version management problem, yes, the HTTP route has been specifically designed to be able to have parent refs pointing up to as many implementations as you have parent refs. So
So, I mean, I can think of a lot of other reasons this is not a good idea. Um, like, did you?
yeah, no, I understand. So the main reason we did this is one of the guiding pillars of Gateway API design from the start has been that we wanted to make it so that you can run multiple implementations in the same cluster at the same time. And there are 2 main reasons. One, for portability. It means that you don't have to blow up your cluster and like have an outage. You can introduce another Gateway API implementation and gradually move things over. And that's why you can have one HTTP route pointing to 2 at once, is because then you can be using the Istio Gateway API implementation, and then if you want to start using the Cilium one as well, then you turn on the Cilium one, you take whatever CNI outages you get as a result of that, and then you create a Cilium gateway, and then if you add the parent ref, that HTTP route will be exposed on both at once. But it's okay because both of those things, because a gateway has gateways must of necessity have different addresses. So you've got the same app. So if we think about the diagram, we've got the same app at the bottom going up to one HTTP route. It branches out to 2 when there's 2 gateways. Those 2 gateways are different entry points into the cluster, right? So you can have traffic come in this way via the Istio gateway, and it goes down through Istio's programming of HTTP route to the same backend, and you can have it through Cilium, right? Like, and it goes through a different traffic path, but ends up at the same backend. And so, but again, part of the intent of Gateway API is that because the spec of HTTP route is set, it doesn't matter that the that it's going to two different implementations, because the route is supposed to behave exactly the same across the two implementations. So it doesn't matter which one you end up going to, you'll still get the same behavior. That's why we have the sort of consistent the thing. So um yes, and so yes, this is one of the biggest reasons why uh, we have the version management problem, is that firstly, you can only have one version of a CRDs available in a cluster at a time, right? So you cannot have Istio using Gateway API 1.4 and Cilium using Gateway API 1.3, because there's only one copy of the Gateway API CRDs allowed in the cluster. So you must either be running Gateway API 1.4 or 1.3. You cannot have both, because there's only one version of the CRD is allowed to be defined in the cluster at a time.
Is
Um,
that in the spec
no,
somewhere?
that's a Kubernetes thing. You can't have multiple, like uh, you can't have multiple definitions of the same object in the cluster at the same time. So you can have multiple versions of a custom resource definition, but you can't, but they all have to be in the one big YAML, right? So you can't have different YAMLs, different gateway definitions present in the cluster at the same time. You can only have one gateway definition. And so that one gateway definition is either going to be the one from Gateway API 1.4 or the one from Gateway API 1.3. You can't have both. It's not, it's like, it's logically impossible to have both. The API server doesn't let you.
Okay, but that actually doesn't cover the case where you can have experimental fields in the CRD, or
So,
if you can have extended fields in the
yep,
CRD, which are implemented differently by
yes,
different
that's 100%
implementations.
correct. So here's how this is supposed to work. For experimental fields, they are either present in the CRD or they are not, firstly. So if you install Gateway API 1.4 experimental, then there are some fields in those YAMLs that are experimental fields that are present in the CRD definition, that are not if you install Gateway API 1.4 standard, right? So there are some fields that are present in that definition. What happens is, once you persist data to those fields, that data is stored in etcd, and it's stored in like a binary format and stuff, but that data is stored in those fields in etcd. If you change the version, say if you downgrade the version, the data stays in the fields and will be pruned when you retrieve the data from it'll be thrown away when you retrieve the data from etcd. It's a bit confusing. I don't want to go too much into it, but like the important thing here is that if you have the experimental version of the CRD installed, and you as Ana uh set data into an experimental field, then it depends on whether or not the implementation that you're using knows how to read that experimental field. So in the case that we're using a Gateway API 1.4 experimental, and Istio supports Gateway API 1.4 experimental, and you're using Contour, and Contour supports 1.3 experimental, and so there's some new fields in Gateway API 1.4, and you set those fields, then yes, the behavior will be different because you've got different versions. Like that is unavoidable. The So in that case, yeah, the behavior will be different between the two implementations. Like part of that is like that's one of the big things about versioning that we have really struggled with, and that's one of the many reasons why we've looked to move to this new we have monthly experimental releases and slower standard releases, so that we can try and have things go a bit faster, and the experimental releases are more clearly experimental. So it'll be easier to say, hey, I am running the 2025 02 experimental release, not the 1.4 experimental version, right? Like if you see what I'm saying, like that. And that's why we wanted to decouple the experimental releases from the same version number, so that you can say confidently, I am running Gateway API 1.5. That means you're running the not experimental version of Gateway API for 1.5. If you are running the experimental version, you are actually running Gateway API 2026 02, which will be the February experimental release.
And in
Sorry.
in the spec, we do require that both implementations are running the same version of the
So,
CRD?
so they need to. So one of the things about versioning and CRDs is if you have the 1.4 experimental version of the CRD and your implementation only supports reading the 1.3 version of the CRD, what will happen is when your implementation says, give me the HTTP route, it will throw away anything that is set into fields it doesn't understand. So like that's how the deserializer works, that when when Contour, for example, reads a HTTP route that includes, I don't know, whatever feature was experimental in 1.4, it will just ignore that config. It won't know, it won't even know that it's there. It's not even that ignore is the not right word. It will never see that config, right? So that's why you'll get different behaviors. It's not about them having to support the thing because we're very careful about ensuring forward compatibility. So a Gateway API 1.3 implementation reading Gateway API 1.4 objects will see the Gateway API 1.3 fields only. Does that make sense?
Well, as long as every implementation does it the same way, but
Well, that's what the
we
conformance tests are for, right? Like, that's why we're picky about conformance tests. So like that's why the conformance tests are such a big deal, is that and that's why we started wanting to be like, hey, you know, we need to be really picky about having conformance tests at least planned out for experimental so that we can get conformance tests in as quickly as possible and be ensuring that implementations behave the same even in experimental. Um, yeah, so the yeah, so it does get really funky here, and there's a bunch of like edge cases that are even worse. Like what happens if you downgrade? What happens if you know you uh, when you populate a field in etcd and then you downgrade, and then the object doesn't get changed, and then and then you upgrade again, that field never gets removed, so it will just start showing up again silently. Like there's a lot of like really messed up stuff there about this that really hurt my brain when I first found out about it. But the net effect here is, yeah, we have worked very hard to maintain the. That's why we're really picky about standard, because once things go to standard, we can never change them again because we have to maintain this sort of backwards and forwards compatibility on the standard and the stable versions of the API to stop this exact thing from happening. Ricardo.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think the other thing it's like we don't have a contract of not breaking experimental, right?
We do
So
not. That's correct.
things they may change on experimental, and that's the
Yep.
risk. Like even with conformance and
Hmm.
uh, if you decide to deploy your experimental on January and then you move to February and we break something, things on those implementations that kind of that you are asking, Kenneth, they may start misbehaving in that
Hmm.
case when you have this new experimental field, and that's the risk behind here, right? So
Yeah.
we don't have this contract of not breaking between experimental releases.
Yeah. It is very important to be clear on that 100%. The and again, that's another reason why we wanted to move the way that we handle experimental to sort of change the to change the sort of the release names so that they're more clearly experimental. And that's also why we moved to having the X prefix on experimental resources so that we can be more clear about, yeah, hey, this might change. It's more sort of upfront. Um, I think but yeah, so the intent is absolutely that if you are, and I think the best way to say it is if both implementations are using standard things and they both support the same Gateway API version, then everything will work exactly the same. If any one of those things is not true, then things may not work exactly the same, right? Like, and then it depends on exactly how advanced the features you're using are. If you are doing weighted routing, then I'm confident that every Gateway API implementation that passes conformance will treat weighted routing exactly the same, because we've had conformance tests for weighted routing for multiple years at this point. So like everybody's doing that exactly the same. And so the more stable a thing is, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to move between implementations without having any problems. Again, that is one of the reasons why you could have two implementations running in the same cluster at the same time. So you get a chance to sort of perform a cut, like a cutover, without having to like and be able to live test against the same implementation and make sure that everything is working actually the same. Yeah, and so and yeah, that's another thing that's very important is that uh extended means optional, not untested. So experimental means like, hey, we haven't made up our minds about this. It might change, it might break, it might be not very well tested. Extended doesn't necessarily mean that. It can be something can be experimental and extended, but once something is standard and extended, that means that it is optional. Implementations don't have to do it, but if they do, then there are conformance tests that validate that all implementations that support that feature will behave in the same way.
Yeah.
And so if you are using extended features on your HTTP route and you want to move to a different implementation, it is very important that you check that that both implementations support the same extended features and all the extended features that you use. Right now, the discoverability of extended features is poor. Like if you use a field, unless you go and look at the API spec, it can be difficult to know if if you're using any extended features. I am hoping that like one of my dreams is that we would have a Gateway Kettle or some other tool be able to say, hey, for a given HTTP route, what extended features does this require? So that you could then do an audit on your cluster and be like, hey, what are all the extended features I'm actually using or my users are actually using? If I want to change Gateway API implementations, what features must I have? Right? Like that would be a thing that I would like to see us have at some point. But that has required everybody to do supported features correctly on their implementations, and it will also require a bit of engineering from us to figure out standard ways to sort of add the metadata of like what feature is this field. And there's no way to do that in the CRD definition at the moment. So we'll have to be clever about that somehow. Or we'll have to add something to the upstream CRD to then make it so you can say, hey, this field requires this feature. Which I think
Yeah.
I've thought about doing anyway.
Yeah, I think that at least like on the next release, I hope that we have some more calm release, like without listener set and all of this rush,
Mm.
and maybe we can start thinking on something like adding markers to the
Yeah.
to the API, proper markers like / gateway extended / gateway whatever that we could
And the
probably,
feature name as well. Yep. Yeah.
yeah, and then we can probably develop some sort of generator or something like that would go through the API definition and
Mhm.
help us on the gateway CTL. Oh, I'm speaking CUDO now. Sorry. I am a CTL person. To provide this kind of feature, but yeah, it's not straightforward.
Yep. Is that a bit more clear, Candice?
Yes, it is more clear. It doesn't help our problem though, because we're in a situation where people want to install experimental. I mean, I'm sure
Right, okay.
Ricardo's talked to you about this before. They
Nick
want to
knows.
install experimental.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we can't figure out a way to actually allow them to do it. That's
Safely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically everybody who provides gateway implementations have a similar problem. The cloud providers have it even more in spades. Like that's why GKE does not implement experimental APIs because they can't support people who turn them on. Because of how their support model works. Or something like that. I don't want to put words in their mouth. But the key part is, lots of people like just can't safely support things that are not standard. And that's one of the reasons why we want to make the experimental more experimental. Experimental in the past has been, we've been so careful about experimental. It's kind of been like stable, but with extra steps. And we want to be clear that no, like that's actually experimental. We might break it. You should not use that in production. And if you really need the feature, you can, but you need to be ready to accept you're accepting the risk that maybe something might break and you'll have to fix it. So you need to be careful. Like, when you do an upgrade, if you're using experimental features, like you need to do a test upgrade first and do some tests. Like you can't just blast it onto your cluster and hope for the best. Whereas the API guarantee that we provide with standard is that it always is and always will be backward compatible. So if you are using standard, if you have the standard YAMLs and you're using only standard features, then it is completely safe to upgrade to the next Gateway API version because nothing will change for your things. Like that's the goal, is that if you're using the standard stuff, then nothing will change. I know that a lot of the time, people want the stuff we were building in experimental like yesterday. And so they push very strongly to be like, but why can't I use TLS route or something like that, right? Like, and I'm like, well, it's close, so you can, but you got to be aware that, and that's why I said to people for a long time, iSurveillance, my actual employer, or Cisco now, but my actual employer has like paying customers who are using TLS route. And I have said to them the whole time, like, you need to be aware that you are taking a risk here, that if upstream we change the TLS route API, there will be a migration that you will need to do for your production services that are using TLS route. And I've just tried to be clear on that with people, like, hey, if you do that,
It's not only that, but it's like all of the support issues that will come in
Yeah.
for those customers who don't know that there's going to be something that's or don't know the extent to which it breaks.
Yeah, exactly. And so like that's one of the reasons why like I have recommended for ages that like if you're providing a platform, like don't support experimental, right? Like you say, like if you support experimental, you're unsupportable, right? Like that's part of the contract, right? Like if you are using experimental, then you are experimenting and you got to support yourself. And if you don't want to do that, if you want paid support for experimental, like that's a deal you got to work out separately. That's not your standard terms, right? Like that's you've got to work out a thing that's like, but for at scale, obviously you can't do that. And that's thus a lot of people who run platforms at scale just say you can't do experimental. If you install the experimental YAMLs, we will revert them. Right? That's how a number of the cloud platforms work, is that when you turn on their Gateway API implementation, they manage the Gateway API YAMLs. And if you upgrade to a newer version, their controller will revert that upgrade immediately, right? Like it'll roll the CRDs back. So you cannot use any version other than their standard one. And that is a way to solve the problem, right? Like, but that means that now you are tying your Gateway API version to your release versions. And that means that, if your customers have to then accept the risk, accept the thing that, hey, Gateway API 1.5 just got released in February. Our next release is not till June. You have to wait till June or July to be able to get the functions that are in Gateway API 1.5.
Yeah.
Like that's the trade-off you make.
There is an additional case which we were discussing, which is when you upgrade from a version that didn't have a field to a version that has a field, and that field was present on the experimental and now it's on standard. And if your implementation doesn't do a good work separating which is experimental versus standard, which is one of our other root problems, you may have a misbehavior, like because we can decide before moving that like something is gonna break between experimental or standard, or some fail close behavior will be a fail open now, right? So that's the other thing that we've been discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so look, I mean, this is all exactly the reason why we want to be we really want to be moving towards like faster releases so that we can get more changes through and have changes to standard take less time to come through, so that things are in experimental for a shorter period of time, but we're still as confident about what they about the quality. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why we've changed the release cadence to sort of have these more frequent experimental releases, so we get quicker experimental feedback, we get more chances to get the experimental stuff right, and then we get sorry and then we get and then by the time we come to standard release, we've had a chance for implementations to bump their dependencies to the experimental release and try it out, even if it's only in a branch. So that's like all of this is like problems we have been trying to address with stuff that we have been doing. I completely get that it does suck, and the good part, and John has pointed this out a few times, is that this is it is a forever problem in the sense that the API probably will never be finished. Like, there's always going to be something we have to add. But the size of the delta over time should get smaller and smaller, right? Like, as the more features we build, the less features there are to build, right? Like, and so, hopefully the more that we can figure this release cadence thing out and get this humming like a well-oiled machine, the less and the better that we can educate people about how this stuff works and the clearer we can make it. Like, hopefully this should be less and less confusing for people. To be honest, I have actually seriously considered a number of times doing a hard search and replace on core and extended with required and optional, because I think those words are clearer. But there's a bit more nuance there about what required means, because there's a bit of a DAG. But functionally, features effectively form a DAG. Okay, I'm gonna have to go in a minute. My kids are calling me. I've got to get going, guys. Sorry, I am being paged by my kids. We are past time anyway, so I will have to catch up with you all later. I'm very sorry. Cheers.
Yeah, no worries. It was a good discussion. I think we
Right,
can
thanks.
go.
Bye.
Thank you.